In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates, life was supposed to be peaceful. Families lived in neat rows of houses with manicured lawns and white picket fences. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes down tree-lined streets and neighbors greeted each other over coffee on lazy Sunday mornings. But for one resident, this picture-perfect setting wasn't quite perfect enough. Enter Karen, a middle-aged woman who had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in the Homeowners Association, HOA handbook. Karen wasn't your average neighbor. She didn't just care about keeping things tidy. She obsessed over it. If someone left a trash can out past collection day, she'd send them an email reminding them of the rules. If a car parked in front of a house had expired tags, she'd call the HOA board immediately. And if anyone dared to host a party that went past 10 p.m., you could bet Karen would show up at their door with a clipboard and a stern look. To some, she was a nuisance. To others, she was a necessary evil, a watchdog ensuring everyone followed the guidelines they'd all agreed to when they moved in. But nothing could have prepared the residents of Willow Creek Estates for what happened on that fateful sunny afternoon. It started like any other day. Kids were playing outside, dogs were barking, and Karen was patrolling the streets in her trusty electric golf cart, clipboard in hand. As she turned the corner near the community pool, something caught her eye. A sheriff's truck parked right by the entrance. Now, most people wouldn't think twice about seeing a police vehicle in their neighborhood. After all, deputies often stop by to check in or respond to minor issues. But Karen saw red flags everywhere. Her mind raced as she pulled her golf cart to a stop. "What is a sheriff's truck doing here?" she muttered under her breath. "This isn't allowed. Non-resident vehicles aren't permitted near the pool area unless there's an emergency." Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as she scanned the scene. There were no flashing lights, no crowds gathering, no signs of trouble, just the deputy sitting calmly inside his truck, jotting notes on a clipboard. Karen's blood pressure spiked. This wasn't just a breach of HOA rules. It was an affront to everything she stood for. How dare someone park so casually in her pristine neighborhood without permission? Determined to set things straight, Karen swung her golf cart around and positioned it squarely behind the sheriff's truck. With the nose of her cart inches from the bumper, she effectively blocked the vehicle from moving. Then, satisfied with her handiwork, she crossed her arms and waited. It didn't take long for the deputy to notice. When he stepped out of his truck, Karen plastered on her best authoritative smile. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but polite. "I'm afraid you're violating our HOA regulations. You'll need to move your vehicle immediately." The deputy blinked, clearly taken aback. He glanced at his truck, then back at Karen. "Ma'am, I'm here on official business," he explained patiently. "I'm conducting routine checks in the area. I'll only be a few more minutes." Karen shook her head, unyielding. "That doesn't matter. The rules are clear. No non-resident vehicles are allowed near the pool area unless there's an emergency. And since there's no emergency, you'll have to leave." At this point, a small crowd had begun to gather. Neighbors peeked out of windows or wandered closer to see what the commotion was about. Some chuckled quietly, amused by Karen's audacity. Others exchanged worried glances, wondering how far she'd push the situation. The deputy tried again to reason with her, explaining that his job required him to be flexible and accessible in case of emergencies. But Karen wouldn't budge. She clung to her clipboard like it was a shield, repeating the same line. "Rules are rules." Minutes ticked by, and the tension grew thicker. The deputy radioed for backup, unsure of how to handle the escalating confrontation. Meanwhile, Karen remained steadfast, convinced she was in the right. What she didn't realize was that her actions were about to spiral into something much bigger than a simple disagreement over parking. By the time the dust settled, her name would become infamous, not just in Willow Creek Estates but across the entire county. As the standoff continued, whispers rippled through the crowd. One neighbor muttered, "She's really going to block a sheriff's truck? Is she serious?" Another replied, "Oh, she's dead serious. That's just who she is." For Karen, this moment felt like validation. She truly believed she was standing up for her community, protecting it from chaos and disorder. But little did she know, her decision to play enforcer would come with consequences far beyond anything she could imagine. After Karen's dramatic blockade of the sheriff's truck, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. By the time the deputy finally managed to resolve the situation, thanks to backup arriving and gently persuading Karen to move her golf cart, the story had already spread like wildfire. Neighbors couldn't stop talking about it. Some thought it was hilarious, others were annoyed, and a few even admired Karen's boldness. But no matter where people stood, one thing was clear. This incident wasn't going away anytime soon. The next morning, as residents headed out for their usual routines, they noticed something unusual. A local news van was parked near the community pool, its satellite dish pointed skyward. Reporters milled about, interviewing anyone willing to share their thoughts. Word had gotten out about the golf cart blockade, and now the whole town wanted to know more. For Karen, this sudden attention felt surreal. At first, she basked in the spotlight, convinced that people would see her actions as heroic. She gave interviews, posing proudly beside her golf cart and holding up her trusty clipboard like a badge of honor. "I'm not sorry for what I did," she told one reporter. "Rules exist for a reason. If we don't enforce them, then what's the point of having them? I was just doing my job as a member of this community." Her words made headlines, turning her into an overnight sensation, but not necessarily in the way she'd hoped. Instead of being hailed as a champion of order, many viewed her as overzealous and out of touch. Memes mocking her popped up online, almost instantly, with captions like "When HOA rules go too far" or "Clipboards versus cops." Social media users dubbed her Golf Cart Karen, a nickname that stuck and followed her everywhere. Meanwhile, tensions within Willow Creek Estates began to rise. The HOA board, once supportive of Karen's efforts to keep the neighborhood pristine, started distancing themselves from her. They held an emergency meeting to discuss the fallout from the incident. While some members sympathized with Karen's intentions, others argued that her behavior reflected poorly on the entire organization. One board member summed it up bluntly: "We're supposed to be fostering harmony here, not creating chaos." Things got worse when Deputy Reynolds filed a formal complaint against Karen, alleging obstruction of justice. This accusation sent shockwaves through the community. Many residents who had initially defended Karen began to question whether she'd gone too far. After all, blocking a law enforcement officer's vehicle wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a serious offense. Even Karen's closest allies started avoiding her calls, unsure of how to handle the growing controversy. For Karen, the mounting pressure became unbearable. She hired a lawyer, convinced that she could fight the charges and prove her innocence. But as the days turned into weeks, reality set in. Legal fees piled up faster than she'd anticipated, draining her savings and leaving her financially strained. Her husband, who worked long hours at a nearby factory, grew increasingly frustrated. He'd always supported Karen's passion for keeping the neighborhood orderly, but this was different. This wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. It was about pride, stubbornness, and refusing to admit when she might have been wrong. "You need to let this go," he told her one evening, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "It's costing us everything. Our money, our reputation, our peace of mind. Is it really worth it?" Karen shot back defensively. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I back down when I was standing up for what's right?" But deep down, doubt began to creep in. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders, she found herself replaying the incident over and over again. Had she crossed a line? Was she too rigid in her interpretation of the rules? These questions haunted her, but admitting fault felt impossible. To Karen, backing down meant losing face, not just with her neighbors, but with herself. As the legal battle dragged on, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates shifted. What had once been a close-knit community now felt fractured. Conversations between neighbors grew tense, with opinions divided. Some still believed Karen had good intentions, while others saw her as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when someone takes things too far. The HOA board implemented new measures to prevent similar incidents in the future. including stricter guidelines for reporting violations and clearer communication channels with law enforcement. Residents welcomed these changes, hoping they would restore a sense of balance to the neighborhood. But for Karen, life became a series of uphill battles. Every court appearance brought fresh scrutiny. Every news article reignited the ridicule. Yet through it all, she clung to her belief that she was fighting for something bigger than herself. Whether that belief was rooted in principle or pride remained unclear, even to her. All she knew was that the stakes kept getting higher, and the cost of her defiance continued to climb. Little did she realize, however, that the worst was yet to come. The legal battle that followed Karen's standoff with the sheriff quickly spiraled out of control. What started as a neighborhood squabble turned into a full-blown court case, drawing even more attention to Willow Creek Estates. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Local newspapers ran front-page articles about golf cart Karen, while national outlets picked up the tale, turning it into late-night talk show fodder. Comedians joked about clipboards and golf carts, and memes continued to flood social media. For Karen, this newfound infamy was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, she felt like she was standing up for something important, rules and order. On the other hand, the ridicule and backlash weighed heavily on her. Karen's lawyer assured her early on that they had a strong case. He argued that Karen genuinely believed she was enforcing HOA guidelines, which were legally binding documents, agreed upon by all residents. In court, he painted her as a concerned citizen who simply wanted to protect her community. But the judge didn't seem convinced. During the trial, Deputy Reynolds testified calmly and professionally, explaining how Karen's actions had obstructed his duties. He emphasized that he wasn't just parked near the pool for fun. He was conducting routine checks, something essential for maintaining safety in the area. His testimony struck a chord with the courtroom, highlighting the absurdity of blocking a law enforcement officer over a minor parking issue. As the days dragged on, Karen became increasingly stressed. Court appearances meant taking time off work, which strained her finances even further. Her husband grew quieter, retreating into himself as bills piled up. The couple used to dream about vacations or upgrading their kitchen, but now those plans felt like distant memories. Instead, every paycheck went straight toward covering mounting legal fees. Friends and neighbors stopped inviting them to gatherings, unsure of how to act around someone embroiled in such a public spectacle. It wasn't long before Karen noticed the whispers whenever she walked through the neighborhood. Some people avoided eye contact altogether, while others gave polite but forced smiles. She felt isolated, like an outsider in the very place she'd tried so hard to protect. The breaking point came when the judge delivered his verdict. After weeks of deliberation, he ruled against Karen, siding with Deputy Reynolds. Not only did the court find her guilty of obstructing justice, but they also ordered her to pay $5,000 in damages. The ruling sent shockwaves through the courtroom and right into Karen's life. For someone already struggling financially, the penalty felt like a death sentence. As she sat there, staring at the floor, her mind raced. How was she supposed to come up with that kind of money? And what would happen if she couldn't? But the financial hit didn't end there. Determined to clear her name, Karen decided to appeal the decision. Her lawyer warned her that appeals could be costly and time-consuming, but she refused to listen. To Karen, giving up meant admitting defeat, and she wasn't ready to do that. So she pressed on, filing paperwork after paperwork, attending hearing after hearing. Each step forward cost thousands of dollars in legal fees, pushing her deeper into debt. By the time the appeals process concluded, with no change in the outcome, Karen owed nearly $38,000. The number seemed impossible, like something out of a nightmare. Her once comfortable life began to unravel. Bills arrived faster than she could pay them, and creditors called constantly, their voices growing harsher with each passing week. Karen and her husband sold their second car, cut back on groceries, and canceled subscriptions they once took for granted. Still, it wasn't enough. Eventually, they made the painful decision to sell their cherished vacation home, a small cabin by a lake where they'd spent countless weekends fishing, hiking, and making memories. Letting go of the cabin felt like losing a part of themselves, but they had no choice. The debt was suffocating and sacrifices had to be made. Through it all, Karen clung to the belief that she'd done the right thing. At least that's what she told herself. Deep down, though, doubts crept in. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the stress threatened to overwhelm her, she replayed the incident in her mind. Had she been too rigid? Too quick to escalate things? These questions haunted her, gnawing at her confidence. Yet admitting fault felt impossible. To Karen, backing down meant validating everyone who mocked her, everyone who dismissed her as that crazy lady with the golf cart. Pride kept her from apologizing, even as her world crumbled around her. Meanwhile, the neighborhood moved on. Life in Willow Creek Estates slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after such a dramatic event. The HOA board implemented stricter rules to prevent similar incidents in the future. Residents breathed a sigh of relief, grateful for the return of peace and predictability. Conversations shifted away from Karen and her golf cart, focusing instead on upcoming block parties and school events. For many, the ordeal served as a reminder of the importance of balance. Rules were necessary, yes, but so was common sense and compassion. Yet for Karen, moving on proved difficult. She withdrew from social activities, skipping HOA meetings, and avoiding eye contact with neighbors. When she did venture outside, she kept her head down, bracing herself for judgmental stares or snide comments. Some residents still harbored resentment toward her, blaming her for tarnishing the community's reputation. Others felt sorry for her, seeing her not as a villain, but as someone who had let her passion spiral out of control. Either way, Karen's presence in the neighborhood remained complicated, a lingering reminder of what happens when good intentions collide with poor judgment. Despite the challenges, Karen refused to give up completely. She poured her energy into finding ways to rebuild her life, determined to claw her way out of the hole she'd dug. Selling the vacation home helped ease some of the financial burden, though it left an emotional scar. She picked up extra shifts at work, cutting expenses wherever possible. Slowly, painfully, she began chipping away at the mountain of debt. It was a long road ahead, but Karen knew she had no choice but to keep going. Looking back, she realized how much the incident had changed her. Once confident and outspoken, she now felt hesitant and unsure. Her clipboard, once a symbol of authority, gathered dust in a drawer. The golf cart she'd driven so proudly during the confrontation sat unused in the garage. Even her relationship with her husband showed signs of strain, though they both worked hard to repair the damage. Through it all, Karen learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the fight isn't worth the cost. Sometimes letting go is the bravest thing you can do. As months passed, the wounds began to heal. Not fully, but enough to allow Karen to take small steps forward. She started volunteering at a local community center, channeling her energy into helping others rather than policing them. It was a humbling experience, one that forced her to confront her own flaws and insecurities. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to start over, to redefine herself not as golf cart Karen, but as someone who had learned from her mistakes. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Karen knew she had to try. The weight of Karen's choices continued to press down on her life like a storm cloud that refused to pass. Every morning, she woke up dreading the day ahead, knowing full well that the consequences of her actions were far from over. The $38,000 in legal fees loomed over her like a mountain too steep to climb. Selling the vacation home had helped ease some of the immediate pressure, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover everything. Now, every penny mattered. She and her husband tightened their belts even further, cutting out anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Dinners at restaurants? Gone. Weekend getaways? A distant memory. Even grocery shopping became a careful exercise in frugality, with Karen poring over sales flyers and clipping coupons just to make ends meet. Her husband, who had always been supportive, even during their toughest moments, was visibly worn down. He worked longer hours at his factory job, picking up overtime shifts whenever he could. But the strain showed in the way he moved slower, spoke less, and avoided conversations about finances altogether. Their once vibrant marriage now felt like two people treading water trying not to drown. They still slept in the same bed, ate meals together, and occasionally shared small smiles. But there was an unspoken tension between them. It wasn't anger or resentment, not entirely, but rather a shared exhaustion that neither knew how to shake off. Karen's social life, already fragile after the incident, all but disappeared. Neighbors who used to invite her to barbecues or holiday parties stopped calling. Some gave polite excuses, saying they were too busy or had family obligations. Others didn't bother pretending. They simply avoided her altogether. When she walked through the neighborhood, she noticed subtle changes. People would wave quickly before turning away, or they'd duck into their homes as soon as they saw her coming. At first, Karen tried to brush it off, telling herself that she didn't care what others thought. But deep down, the isolation stung more than she cared to admit. Even her own children began pulling away. Her teenage son, usually quiet and reserved, started spending more time at friends' houses, staying out late and rarely mentioning his mom unless pressed. Her daughter, a college student home for summer break, seemed uncomfortable around her, often retreating to her room or disappearing for hours at a time. One evening, Karen overheard her daughter talking on the phone, laughing nervously as she said, "Yeah, my mom's kind of infamous now. You wouldn't believe what happened." The words hit Karen like a punch to the gut. Infamous. That's what she'd become. A punchline, a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner tables and coffee shops. Desperate to reclaim some sense of normalcy, Karen threw herself into volunteering at the local community center. It wasn't glamorous work. She sorted donations, organized food drives, and helped set up for events. But it gave her something to focus on besides her mounting debts and tarnished reputation. Slowly, she began to build connections with the people there. Unlike her neighbors, these individuals didn't know her as Golf Cart Karen. To them, she was just another volunteer, someone willing to lend a hand when needed. For the first time in months, Karen felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was her chance to start fresh, to redefine herself not by her mistakes but by her willingness to help others. Still, old habits died hard. At the community center, Karen sometimes caught herself slipping back into her old ways, micromanaging tasks or insisting on strict adherence to rules. One day, while organizing a charity bake sale, she found herself lecturing a group of volunteers about where to place the donation jars. "They need to be lined up perfectly," she said, rearranging them for the third time. "People won't take us seriously if we're disorganized." The volunteers exchanged awkward glances before one of them gently suggested, "Maybe we should focus on getting the baked goods ready instead?" Karen froze, realizing how ridiculous she sounded. She forced a laugh and stepped back, letting someone else take charge. It was a small moment, but it stuck with her. Change wouldn't come overnight, she realized. Breaking free from years of rigid behavior would require patience and humility. Back at home, Karen started having honest conversations with her husband about their struggles. Late one night, sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of bills spread out before them, she broke down. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I messed everything up." Her husband reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "We'll get through this," he said softly. "It's going to take time, but we will." Those words stayed with Karen long after the lights went out. For so long, she had clung to her pride, refusing to acknowledge her role in the chaos that had consumed her life. But now, admitting fault, even just to herself, felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. She realized that true strength wasn't about being perfect or always being right. It was about owning your mistakes, learning from them, and finding a way to move forward. As weeks turned into months, Karen continued to chip away at her debt, one payment at a time. Progress was slow but steady. She took on odd jobs around the neighborhood, yard work, pet sitting, even helping an elderly neighbor clean out her attic. Each task brought in a little extra cash, and each accomplishment, no matter how small, gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Her husband pitched in too, and though their relationship still bore scars from the ordeal, they began reconnecting in meaningful ways. They started having regular date nights again, keeping things simple with homemade dinners and board games. It wasn't the same as before, but it was enough to remind them why they had fallen in love in the first place. Meanwhile, Willow Creek Estates carried on without much thought for Karen anymore. Life in the neighborhood had returned to its usual rhythm, with kids playing outside, dogs barking, and neighbors chatting over fences. The HOA board remained vigilant, ensuring that rules were followed fairly and consistently. Residents joked about the golf cart incident less frequently now, treating it more like a quirky story from the past than a source of ongoing drama. For many, Karen's downfall served as a reminder of the importance of balance, that enforcing rules was necessary, but so was understanding and compassion. Yet despite the distance between Karen and her neighbors, there were occasional signs of forgiveness. One afternoon, as she was mowing her lawn, a neighbor stopped by to drop off a plate of cookies. "Just wanted to say thanks for everything you've done at the community center," the woman said with a warm smile. "It's really made a difference." Karen blinked in surprise, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. As the neighbor walked away, Karen stood there for a moment, holding the plate of cookies like it was a treasure. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a small step toward rebuilding trust. By the end of the year, Karen had paid off nearly half of her debt. The road ahead was still long, but she felt more hopeful than she had in ages. Volunteering had taught her the value of service, and her experiences had shown her the cost of unchecked pride. She wasn't the same person she'd been before the mime incident, and maybe that was okay. Growth often came from pain, and Karen was determined to grow, to learn, to adapt, and to become someone worthy of respect again. As she looked out at her neighborhood one crisp autumn evening, Karen allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The leaves were changing colors, painting the streets in shades of red, orange, and gold. Kids laughed as they jumped into piles of fallen leaves, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked happily. Despite everything, Willow Creek Estates still felt like home. And though her journey wasn't over yet, Karen knew she was heading in the right direction. Years had passed since the infamous golf cart incident, and while Karen's life was still far from perfect, she had made strides toward healing and rebuilding. The neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates had moved on too, though whispers about her actions lingered like a faint echo. For Karen, redemption wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow, deliberate process, one step at a time. And as painful as it had been to confront her mistakes, she now saw how much she'd grown because of them. Karen no longer spent her days obsessing over HOA rules or patrolling the streets in her golf cart with a clipboard. Instead, she found joy in simpler things, helping others at the community center, tending to her garden, and spending quiet evenings with her husband. Her once pristine lawn still looked nice, but it didn't have to be perfect anymore. She'd learned to let go of the need for control, embracing imperfection instead. It wasn't always easy. Old habits occasionally crept back, especially when stress hit hard. But she reminded herself every day that growth wasn't about being flawless. It was about trying harder tomorrow than you did today. One Saturday morning, Karen decided to bake cookies for her neighbors. It was a small gesture, but one she hoped would bridge some of the gaps she'd created over the years. She packed the treats into a basket and walked door to door, leaving them on porches with handwritten notes that read, "Thanks for your patience. I'm working on being better." At first, she worried people might laugh or throw the cookies away, but to her surprise, many neighbors responded warmly. Some even invited her inside for coffee, sharing stories and laughter like they hadn't in years. One elderly woman hugged her tightly, saying, "We all make mistakes, dear. What matters is that you're trying." These moments of connection gave Karen hope. They reminded her that forgiveness wasn't just about earning it from others. It was also about forgiving herself. She realized that holding on to guilt and shame only kept her stuck in the past. Letting those feelings go allowed her to move forward bit by bit. Over time, she began to rebuild relationships not just with her neighbors but also with her family. Her children noticed the change too. Her son started coming home more often, bringing friends around who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know his mom. Her daughter called more frequently, updating her on college life and asking for advice. These little victories meant the world to Karen. They showed her that love and trust could be repaired, even after everything fell apart. At the community center, Karen became a beloved volunteer. Her organizational skills came in handy during fundraisers and charity events, and her dedication inspired others to pitch in. People admired her resilience, seeing her not as the woman who blocked a sheriff's truck but as someone who had turned her life around. Occasionally, new volunteers would ask about the rumors they'd heard, curious if there was any truth to the golf cart Karen legend. Karen didn't shy away from these questions. Instead, she used them as opportunities to share her story, honestly, explaining what she'd done wrong and how she was working to make amends. Her openness earned her respect, proving that owning up to your flaws could be just as powerful as hiding them. Her financial situation improved gradually, thanks to her hard work and sacrifices. After paying off the last of her legal fees, Karen celebrated quietly with her husband. They treated themselves to a modest dinner at their favorite restaurant, raising their glasses in a toast. "To second chances," he said, smiling. Karen nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She had fought so hard to get here, not just financially, but emotionally, and she knew she wouldn't take this fresh start for granted. The HOA board eventually approached Karen with an unexpected offer. They asked her to serve as a mediator between residents and the association, helping resolve disputes before they escalated. It was ironic, given her history, but the board believed her experiences made her uniquely qualified for the role. At first, Karen hesitated, unsure if she was ready to step back into that world. But after some thought and encouragement from her husband, she accepted. This time, however, she approached the job differently. Rather than enforcing rules rigidly, she focused on listening, understanding, and finding compromises. Her efforts paid off, earning praise from both neighbors and board members alike. As the years went by, Karen's story became less about the mistakes she'd made and more about the lessons she'd learned. Local newspapers even reached out to interview her, curious about her journey. In one article, she reflected on how her obsession with rules had blinded her to the bigger picture. "I thought following the rules meant protecting the community," she told the reporter. "But I realize now that real protection comes from kindness, empathy, and understanding. Rules are important, sure, but they aren't everything." The article resonated with readers, sparking conversations about balance and compassion. Some people admitted they'd judged Karen harshly, while others shared their own stories of making poor decisions and learning from them. Karen appreciated the support, though she remained humble. She didn't see herself as a hero or a role model, just as someone who had stumbled badly and managed to pick herself back up. By the time Karen retired, she felt at peace with her past. She still lived in Willow Creek Estates, surrounded by familiar faces and memories. The neighborhood had changed over the years. New families had moved in, older ones had left, but its spirit remained the same, a place where people cared for each other, warts and all. Karen often sat on her porch in the evenings, watching kids play and dogs chase each other across lawns. She felt grateful for the second chance she'd been given, knowing it hadn't come easily. Looking back, she realized that her greatest strength hadn't been her determination to enforce rules. It had been her ability to adapt, to grow, and to learn. Life wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about facing them head-on and using them to become a better version of yourself. And though Karen's journey had been messy, painful, and humbling, she wouldn't trade it for anything. It had taught her what truly mattered: connection, humility, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter how tough the road ahead might seem. In the end, Karen's story wasn't just about a woman who blocked a sheriff's truck with her golf cart. It was about a person who lost her way, faced the consequences, and found her way back, not through perfection, but through perseverance, And in doing so, she reminded everyone around her that no matter how far you fall, it's never too late to rise again.